Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for September 28, 2012. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Joining us today, we have John Hogoboom and we have Jim Quazing. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's talk with Jim here a little bit. I think, Jim, you said there was a certificate revocation underway?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, Adobe announced yesterday or today, I guess yesterday, that they're going to be revoking a code signing certificate and reissuing the software that's been signed with it since July 10th. Apparently, some bad guys got a hold of it and had signed some malware with it. So they're in the process of doing the revocation. The re-signing. They're not going to revoke it until the 4th of October, which just reiterates an issue we've talked about in the past about the difficulty of revoking these kinds of certificates. This particular certificate had signed a number of Windows applications and some Adobe Air applications that run on both Windows and Mac OS. So they have to re-sign those with the new certificate and then push the updates out via their automatic update process before they revoke the old one. So, there's a window there where, any malware signed with that is not going to be recognized immediately as invalid until the revocation goes through. Haven't heard any real details other than that they were aware of some malware that had been signed with it. I personally haven't seen any of that malware yet, but I suppose some of my colleagues that are researchers probably have copies of it, and I'll see if I can get my hands on one here soon.
Okay. Now, Jim, I have a couple of questions about this. I'm aware that these applications are being signed. Can you explain a little bit about how that might manifest itself from a user's perspective? That is, not in this case where you have malware that's been signed by, a legitimate certificate, but what if the certificate didn't match? How would a user recognize that?
How would the user recognize that the certificate that was used wasn't theirs, or that it was an invalid certificate?
Yeah, an invalid certificate, for example. Is there a pop-up or something when I run the program, or is it just during installation?
Yeah, well, generally when you first run it, something you've downloaded from the internet in current versions of Windows, there's a pop-up asking if you want to do it and if you want to check for it every time, and it does show who the signer was, and it goes out and does a check of the validity of the certificate if it can connect to the internet to do that. So you would notice it right there, and if the certificate has been revoked, then I don't believe that it will actually let you run it. I hope it won't let you run it, but
at the very least, you get some sort of a pop-up that says, this software didn't come from somebody who...
Or it couldn't verify the certificate or something to that effect, yeah.
Right. So, is it specifically in the installation process? So, once this certificate gets revoked, if somebody had downloaded the malware in this case, or even had a previous version, are they going to get alerted to that fact?
That I'm not sure of. That's something I actually want to test out once they once they revoke the certificate. I'm not sure if that would check if it's already been installed.
Well, I do know Adobe is working with several antivirus vendors to put in signatures in advance as well. So, hopefully they'd be able to detect things that are using this certificate that probably aren't authentic. I think that would be what they're shooting for there.
So they would have some specific examples of the known malware that has gotten away with the signing and be able to work with antivirus vendors to get that incorporated, right?
Right.
So that's good.
Now, I guess this isn't the first code signing certificate we've seen. We've seen not a lot, but we've seen more of these recently, and from what I understand of the article that I read, it looks like it was probably some type of APT-type intrusion where an attacker, maybe spearphished somebody at Adobe, was able to get in there and find this code signing certificate, take it, and then use it to sign their own code. So, I think we mentioned last time this came up. This is an important thing to keep under lock and key very tightly, especially when you're a software, a large software provider like this, like Adobe is.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what the standards are, or even if there are standards for software signing certificates. In fact, don't quote me on this, but I don't know this for a fact, but I believe there are requirements to protect, site certificates associated with PCI, payment card industry websites. That is to make sure that the private key associated with those sites cannot be taken. That is to actually store it in a piece of hardware that protects it, so you can't go in and just pilfer the private key. And it seems like perhaps a similar set of standards would be advisable for code signing certificates as well. That is, once you've done all the development and you're ready to get it signed, you have basically a system that protects that key and does the signing on your behalf. It wouldn't protect somebody from coming in and forcing their own malware through that same signing platform, but at least keep the key from being stolen.
Yeah.
Not
sure
that made a whole lot of sense, but it made sense to me anyway.
Yeah, no, it does. The private, the certificates, the private keys are, potentially your business's reputation, and they need to be closely guarded. And essentially that means that most of the time they probably should not be online. They should be, on a separate machine that's air-gapped, and you walk it over there to sign it and you bring it back, kind of thing. But
right. So apparently there was again, Jim, a vulnerability associated with Samsung that was announced this week, and I guess, is there a little question about it?
Well, yeah, this has gotten quite a bit of press and attention, various places. It was announced by a researcher at a conference in Brazil, I believe, this past week, that some of this, it was initially, they said, some of the Samsung devices, and since it's turned out that it may be a little wider than that, it may have TouchWiz or the dialer software. But anyway, what could happen is if the phone received an SMS or a QR code or NFC near-field communication or a crafted website that contained one of these USSD codes, which is a way of passing information to the phone, one of these potential codes would do a factory reset of the phone, which could potentially wipe any data you've got on there. If you're not doing backups, that means it could be lost. The vulnerability, or the issue apparently had been known, and Samsung claims that they had fixed it in the Galaxy S3s, their newest devices, and that they were backporting it to some of the other devices. It's not clear that every carrier had necessarily gotten those fixes out to all of their users. And, it's USSD codes by themselves, are not necessarily inherently evil. There are some, uses. They were designed for a reason, and they're in there for a reason. So I think some of the press may have been a little bit overblown, but clearly somebody, and a bad guy doing, embedding this in the proper kind of SMS message or QR code or whatever, could cause your phone to get reset to factory defaults, and if you're not regularly backing your phone up, you could definitely lose a lot of information that way.
So I guess the moral of the story here isn't a new one for this program. It certainly is keep your phone up to date, because there, at least in this case, there will be some patches coming out if they haven't already come out. And back up your data, right?
Absolutely. And one of it isn't entirely clear to me exactly where the issue was, because there have been some conflicting reports on that, and I personally haven't dug that deep into it. But one of the things they were suggesting is using alternate dialers and not the default one. And when you start getting into that stuff and you're potentially loading alternate dialers on your phone, you open yourself up to even more problems trying to protect yourself from this one. So, hopefully the carriers will all be pushing the updates out to all of the affected users relatively soon. It's one of those issues. The carriers also need to make sure that they're testing these things themselves. So we've talked about that in the past, that sometimes it doesn't seem like the patches come out real quickly, but that's because there's a serious testing procedure that they need to go through to make sure the fix isn't going to break things and make matters worse for more users. So.
Right. Yeah, there's not much point in pushing out a fix that breaks the phone, right?
Yeah, or that breaks. You push out a fix for X number of users, and the fix ends up breaking 5X number of users. That doesn't go over real well with the users either.
Okay, thank you there, Jim. And so let's talk a little bit about, I guess, perhaps what may have been rightfully the sort of the headline article of the program today. Clearly there's been a reasonable amount of news media related to some denial of service attacks against the financial industry. There's been a number of banks that have been targeted, actually, through the course of this past week as well as last week. And while it hasn't been that many organizations, it certainly has, I think, created a bit of a ruckus. So there have been a lot of articles out in the media. I thought it would be worthwhile to take a look at a couple of them, and then to, I guess, dismiss a couple of myths that seem to be out there, and try to fill them with a couple of some facts associated with this. So, the first article I just happened to come across, not picking on any specific ones, but one here is from CNN, and it indicates that major banks have been hit with the biggest cyber attacks in history. Certainly these are significant. They've made a lot of made it into the press. There's been some large banks that have been affected by this, and it probably is visible to a lot of organizations. But in terms of the size of attacks, I don't think this is the largest attack that we've seen by any stretch of the imagination. I think, John, you've done a little bit of analysis in this. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, yes. So they're larger than most, but not the largest that we've seen.
Yeah,
so the one thing this article did get right is all these targets are accurate. And, say that much. But again, it's not the largest attacks by any stretch of the imagination that I've seen. We've seen much larger ones in the past.
Well, and in fact, so there's the sort of the volume of the attack we've seen much larger, and then in addition, we've also seen cases where, and this is going back some time, but there was a significant attack that actually was not all that well organized, but pretty darn effective against the root DNS servers of the internet. This is going back some time ago, so we probably weren't as dependent on the internet at the time. But in terms of having a devastating effect on the internet as a whole, basically it shut down the internet. So in that sense, it's not the biggest in history either in terms of the scope of impact of the attacks, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess another sort of topic here or article that kind of came to mind here is one, stuck out for me. This is one that basically it mentioned that these attacks are purported to be associated with hacktivists, in particular Islamic hacktivists that are trying to protest some activity that's taking place. We don't really need to get into the specifics of that, but the point here is that there were a couple of things in this article. One is it kind of stated that the participants in this were actually supporters, that is, they were volunteering to be a part of the attacks. And certainly that has traditionally been the case. That is, attacks that have been conducted by the group Anonymous, they've solicited participants to volunteer their computers to participate in attack activity. These attacks, based on our analysis, look very different than that. These are cases where it appears to be compromised web servers that are around the Internet. There is some geographic bias associated with those web servers, near as we can tell, and they are clearly ones that are not volunteering to be a part of the attack activity. This is one where there's a botnet, in essence, that's conducting these attacks. So this isn't volunteers that are having some sort of devastating effect. This is a case where this group has sequestered, in effect, a number of servers and are conducting these attacks. So there's no direct correlation between support for the hacktivist message here and the effects of this attack. Go ahead.
I was going to just mention here, they mentioned hundreds of thousands of attack sources. That's not what we're seeing. And again, our visibility into things is not perfect either, but I'm seeing perhaps thousands, not hundreds of thousands, of these compromised web servers. We've talked about protecting your web server before in other shows and whatnot. The tactics that they seem to be using here is similar to a lot of those old ones. It's interesting, though, that there's a lot of coverage. So they're attacking poorly defended Joomla servers and WordPress and Drupal. There's a lot of different software packages that they're, these off-the-shelf kind of content hosting software packages that you can deploy on your web server. If you don't keep them up to date, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that, are found over time, and they're finding these weakly protected ones out there and dropping, payloads on there such that they can control the web server and make it do what it wants to act as an attack source. So what I would say, hopefully the ISPs and these web hosting companies are going to kind of try to get this under control or figure out which ones are impacted in their own networks. But if you are a website or if you host a website, it might be good to go check your web server. I don't know if I can give you specifics of what to look for, but just look for any files that have been modified probably within the past few weeks that you're not expecting any files to have been modified, especially PHP files that are dropped inside your web document root. So that's a little tip there.
Well, it's a good practice anyway. You want to make sure that there aren't changes being made to your website that aren't supposed to be there, regardless of this particular set of attacks, but that would be some good advice in general, I think.
Right.
Yeah, a couple other things that sort of came out about this, or at least are apparent to me, is that, I expect that what these attackers have done is they've researched a lot of potential targets. Clearly they're targeting the financial industry, but there are a lot of banks out there, a lot of credit unions, a lot of organizations they could have gone after. And I suspect that what they've done is tried to find some attributes of different, of the different websites associated with these financial organizations, and tried to pick out ones where they saw some sort of a weakness that they might be able to take advantage of. So that is one sort of aspect to kind of consider here. That is, if you're operating a website, if you feel that you might be a potential target, you want to make sure that you have a fairly robust strategy for protecting that infrastructure from a denial of service attack. That includes not just subscribing to a DDoS defense service. We happen to offer one of the services. There are others that do the same. A number of ISPs have supporting services associated with it. But on top of that, start to consider what might happen if the website were, for example, to go down, or if perhaps they targeted DNS servers, and how you might react to that or how it might impact other things. So those would be some good things to sort of keep in mind. And, obviously, as it's been sort of reported in the press, there have been some impacts associated with some of these denial of service attacks. But clearly, it didn't put the bank out of business. It was a sort of a disruption. Perhaps the hacktivists just wanted to be able to exercise or show that they could exercise some power here, but they weren't entirely successful in doing that. Perhaps their real motivation here is to get some press coverage. So to the extent that's possible, you want to sort of minimize what their level of success would be. Now, there was, I've had some inquiries from some customers, and so I thought I'd share this as well. There was a advisory that was put out, and this is from this is what they called a fraud alert from the cyber criminals. It was titled Cyber Criminals Targeting Financial Institution Employee Credentials to Conduct Wire Transfer Fraud. And this came from the Internet Crime Complaint Center. This is basically something that's operated by the FBI, where folks can volunteer information about Internet crimes that have been conducted against them, and then they've assembled this into an advisory. Now, the significance here is this advisory was posted on the 17th of September, which is very closely correlating to these denial of service attacks against financial institutions. But to my knowledge, there is no strong relationship between the two. In particular, in this advisory that was put out, there was reference to remote access tools that is trying to get into the enterprises of financial organizations and conduct fraudulent transfers, and then using denial of service attacks to either distract security people from recognizing this fraud activity or to inhibit them from being able to do something about it. And the specific tools that have been used in these have typically been sort of the Zeus toolkit, which is one that's designed for these transaction frauds. They also mentioned Dirt Jumper, which is basically a tool that has a denial of service attack capability associated with it. The significance here is these recent attacks have not been using those tools, and as I said, it does not appear that there's any financial fraud motivation here. It seems like the recent attacks that have made the press are mostly associated with the hacktivist statements associated with those. Now, I guess there are other toolkits that have been used for these types of fraudulent transaction activities. Is that right, John? That Black Energy comes to mind? And
yeah, sure, Black Energy. There are a lot of them out there. I can't even think to name them all. I know, Zeus has that new game over variant, but there's another one. Cridex is another one that we've talked about in the past. There are a lot of account stealing type of Trojans out there that are basically designed to steal your login ID and password from websites as you browse to them.
Yeah, just because it doesn't appear that these denial of services were launched to cover this kind of attack doesn't mean that some opportunists might not try to hide this kind of fraudulent activity because somebody else is already doing the denial of service. So
that's a good point.
Yep.
Absolutely a good point. So you don't want to let your guard down by any stretch. I guess another sort of attribute, by the way, most of these fraudulent transaction activities have the tendency to target medium-sized or smaller businesses or smaller banks, credit unions, for example. Reason being, they're probably less in a position to put forth a strong investigation. We've talked about this topic before. But in any case, we've gotten questions about this. I wanted to at least share some observations associated with the recent attacks and how they do not appear to be strongly connected with this particular advisory.
And just one last comment. What I took from this article is, we talked a lot about Zeus and other types of password-stealing Trojans. They're usually targeted at users of those financial institutions. So, like, they might target me, get my login ID and password to my bank, and go in and they can transfer my money out of my account. Mm-hmm. This particular article, the way I read it, was the attackers here are more targeting people inside your financial institution, like the people who have access to everybody's accounts. They're trying to get employee access credentials inside those institutions so they could do these large wire transfers through many different accounts, because as an employee of that bank, you'd be able to access a lot of people's different accounts.
Yep.
I guess that was my take on it. And, you know, to corroborate your point, I don't see any connection between this particular notification and the DDoS attacks that we've been seeing. That doesn't mean there isn't one. It just doesn't look to me like there's any correlation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And in fact, they even pointed out, I think, that they were using the training materials that are available to organizations to help learn how to do those transactions.
Right.
Well, okay, so let's take a look at the internet weather here. No real significant sets of activities that stuck out in my mind here this past week. I mean, there are a couple here. We'll point them out. One is that we certainly did have a sort of a spike in probing activity. This is in particular sources that are probing on port 80 TCP. That's obviously web activity. Primarily the sources were from sources in the United States, followed by a number from China. And the number of sources that were doing this probing activity was just short of about 13,000 of them that we picked up, fairly relatively short duration. Now, we did see sort of what I would describe as a little bit of an upward trend in terms of the number of sources that were scanning sort of in a steady state on port 80 as well over the last few days. I have a sneaky suspicion that might be related to not necessarily attackers, but perhaps researchers that are digging around for these scripts that John was just describing. That's speculation on my part, but it might be, looking around to see what web servers might be vulnerable and trying to identify which ones might even already have been affected and part of this botnet. Not sure.
Part of the DDoS botnet, just to make it clear. So the small little ramp up there Brian's pointing out could be activity related to people trying to find bots, compromised web servers related to that DDoS botnet, whereas the larger spike is probably related to the DVR webcam botnet, right?
Yes, correct. Right. Yeah, and so sort of two independent sets of activity, in my opinion, based on what we've observed here.
And I suspect you're probably right about that small increase there.
Next item here is, this is, again, sources scanning on port 23 TCP. Obviously, this is one of those ports that likes to get, brute force attack activity against the passwords. We see, again, this is one where it's somewhere between 12,000 and 13,000 sources that we saw scanning for a short period of time. Again, potentially associated with the same botnet, although I certainly did see a different geographic profile associated with this, mostly sources in the United States, followed by India and Australia. So this one was a little less strong indicator of that being associated with the same botnet. And most of the active sources are from India here in this case. Next item, or example that we have, or exhibit, I should say, this is based on scan probes. Now, we saw both an increase in the sources that were doing scanning as well as the probes. I elected to show you the change in terms of the number of probes here that were taking place on port 5038 TCP. This particular port is associated with asterisk voice over IP management, VoIP management. This one fairly clearly did show that it was associated with that security surveillance camera DVR botnet that we've been talking about for so many weeks. Clearly, if it wasn't already obvious, the level of activity we've seen in terms of reconnaissance from that botnet has reduced significantly. This activity may be actually, speculating here again, maybe actually showing a little bit of its true colors in the sense that if they're looking around for voice over IP management capabilities, there's a potential that this may be associated with some sort of a toll fraud activity, or using these devices, or potentially using these devices to build a voice over IP network. Again, speculation, but potentially what they'd be looking for. So
it's also, I was going to say, it's also possible that they're looking to recruit Asterisk PBX servers as new bots. We know that they go after embedded devices and appliances. Asterisk is not necessarily really an appliance, but it does fit their model of a bot that they would recruit into their network. Even though most of it is webcams and DVRs, we know that there's other types of embedded devices as well inside their suite of bots.
Yep, good point. Thank you. So with in terms of the activity, the distribution of ports that have been had activity on them in the last day, this is in terms of the most probed ports, top 10. We've talked about this zero-access botnet and the peer-to-peer activity associated with that. It's the 16,465, 16,470, 16,471, and 16,464 associated with that. Clearly port 445 is still on here, as it is usually, but it seems to be diminishing in terms of significance lately. We have port 22, port 23 we had talked about, 3389, that's remote desktop protocol, and port 1433, that's the Microsoft SQL database. So fairly typical in terms of the ports that we expect to see on here. And as I said, the activity associated with that sort of broad set of reconnaissance activity we've seen on many ports from that security surveillance camera DVR botnet has diminished significantly, so this other category is much smaller than it had been previously. Similarly, in terms of the most sources probing on a particular port, we have very similar activity on this one. A couple of ports to point out that are a little different. One is this port 210. This has some relationship to the command and control associated with that security surveillance camera DVR botnet. And the others are fairly typical here. As I said, some of these zero-access botnet activities, port 23, port 3389 is on here. And as usual, port 445 TCP, which, as we know, is mostly latent configure infections, or some botnets have mimicked some of that exploit functionality. So that's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we welcome your email. If you have suggestions in the program or questions about something we've talked about, you can contact us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. The video program is available from the AT&T Tech channel. Just go to att.com/ThreatTraq, or you can go to YouTube and search for the ThreatTraq program. There's also audio versions available from iTunes and FeedBurner. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim, for your contributions. I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back next week for another ThreatTraq program, and until then, keep your network safe.